Hey guys, I'm back with another tutorial. In fact, I didn't really go anywhere since the last one. In this tutorial, we're going to go over the basics of editing text, specifically in a layout. So there's some nuances here. There's definitely a bit of a learning curve to it. If you don't understand everything I've gone over in this tutorial the first time watching through, please watch again. Please look into other tutorials online, or just reach out to me. I can always give you assistance that way. Just because this is a lot to go over, and I don't have the luxury of teaching you this in person quite yet. So, before we do anything, look over our design. Let's look at what different components of text we have to work with here. So I've spent a bit of time throwing this together. So we already have a cover section to this design, which is all custom. You can see all these little blue lines were individually created. I'm going to be doing another tutorial on how to make something like this. We're not getting that advanced quite yet. What you guys are going to be focusing on, and this is why I've provided you this exact layout to work with, is you're going to be focusing on this right-hand side, which for you should be only half full. That's because I want you to fill in this second section. That's your practice for doing this kind of work. So let's look at what this second section is composed of, shall we? We've got a few things going on here. We've got our title, obviously, which again, placeholder article 1. Then we've got a whole bunch of text, which is in Latin. It's placeholder text, but that would be where our actual writing would go for an article. Then we have a moron line, just telling us where the rest of the text would be, because no article is going to be 2 sentences long. Finally, we have a photo. We're going to deal with the photos in our next tutorial. In the case of this one, what we're going to be doing is simply inserting a title, some body text, and a more on line. So without further ado, I'm just going to delete these guys. The only other thing to keep in mind is that we're also working with lines here. The lines are something I don't want you to worry about right now. They'll be, again, your next tutorial. So where do we start? That's always the question, right? Well, like I said in my first tutorial, Adobe Indesign is just composed of squares. That's all it is. That's all it ever is, unless you're doing some really weird avant-garde stuff. So let's work from there. Right off the bat, let's go to our rectangle frame tool, which is a little square with an X in it on our toolbar. And again, if you booted and you're not in typography, up in the top right, make sure to be in typography. You might be in Essentials or Essentials Classic. That tends to be the default. Typography has all the tools we'll be working with. So I now have the rectangle frame tool selected. What am I going to do now? Simply put, I'm going to draw. And if you haven't noticed, I've already hit W so that I can see where my frames are, where my lines are. The cool thing about Adobe InDesign is that you can line everything up to the nearest thousandth of a millimeter, if I'm not mistaken. We won't get quite that detailed, but we're going to get pretty close. So let's first draw just a simple box that my title will go in. Make it longer than it is tall, because after all, the title is longer than it is tall. I drew it about half the width of the full article section, because that's what it will be once we're done with it. The cool thing about these frames is that once you've drawn them, pardon me, switch to that. Once you've drawn them, you can adjust them however you like, so if you don't get it perfect the first time around, no big deal. before I even begin to think about putting my title in, let's just draw in the rest of the boxes. So again, we're not worrying about the lines here, but let's draw another box. Same width. And let's run it pretty much all the way down. That'll be where our body text goes. In the case of this tutorial, we're not worrying about the image here. So what I'm actually going to do is use this spare space to draw, or to show you how to do a 2-column layout. So I want you to draw another big box about the size of the image, but we're not going to put an image in it. And then finally, we'll draw one last little box. That'll be where our moron line goes. So we've got a bunch of boxes. What do we do now? What we're going to do is make sure our type tool is selected. If you don't have anything selected here, you can just press T on your keyboard and it will turn to that tool. Then we're going to click on the title box. And for the title, I'm just going to put Article 2. Now, the first thing that should be apparent when you're typing in here is that Article 2 looks nothing like Article 1 up here. That's okay. We're going to be adjusting that in a moment. I happen to know these settings, and so I'm going to read them out to you for what adjustments we're going to make. With all of that text highlighted, you can highlight it by double-clicking or click and drag. You can either adjust your text settings up at the top, or I prefer to pop open the character menu, and it's good practice to know where these are. So character is the A with a line on its right-hand side, right at the bottom of your side menu. And this will pop out a mini menu with all those same settings. It does allow you more options. We're not going to deal with those quite yet. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn my text from Minion Pro, which happens to be my default, to Bond Schrift, semi-bold, semi-condensed. I do believe this is a default text for you guys. If not, feel free to change it to whatever you feel is close. In future assignments, we'll worry about everything being precise. I mostly want you to get a feel for adjusting these kinds of things. So, for example, if you clicked on Bond Schrift, but you didn't click on semi-bold, semi-condensed. Let's say you picked regular. That's okay. Because what we can do, I'm double-clicking on my text, is we can go into the sub-menu where it says regular and just adjust right there. So that's semi-bold, semi-condensed. The other thing we're going to adjust is the size of our font, which is right below that. We're going to bump it up to 25 point. 24, 25. There we go. You'll note one other thing is different. The Article 1 heading is also in all caps. And we could type this out in all caps just like anyone else would normally do, but there are some tools that make it a bit more customizable for us. So up top, where these two capital T's are, you can click on those to make everything all caps, or again, you can go into a side menu here and do it. I recommend just clicking up top. We have Article 2, and there we go. They match perfectly. Now, if we're doing an entire 6 pages where we need every title to match, we're not going to be able to remember all these settings all the time, because we also have to do it for body text and the moron text and any page numbers or whatever. So what we make use of is called character styles. So I'm going to set this back to, I'll set it to Kitchen Police, which is apparently a font I've used at some point. It looks terrible, and we're going to solve this. So, regardless of what font you're on, I've already built in a character style for the article titles. So when I click character styles, this lowest menu on the sidebar, I can just click article title and it will automatically set it to what I want. And that's all well and good if you're given a template that has these styles built in. It's super simple to work with. It's not like we're stuck in the style. If I wanted to give it some slant, I could. It's not going to mess anything up, aside from the text that I'm making obscenely slanted. That said, we also should have an understanding of how to set these styles. So let's set this to something else, Acme font. So you'll note that we are on article title because that's what our what style we last selected for this piece of text here. But we want a new style. We want to call it something else. So I'm going to click new style, this little plus inside a square, and then we get character style 1 here. Character style 1 has all the same settings as article 2. If I double click, we get all sorts of options to mess with. More than anything else, we want to change its name. I think the font was called Acme, so I'm calling it Acme. And what else is cool here is if we are working on a style, let's say we're working on article style, and we decide, well, all of it needs to change. Let's say it all needs to be regular semi-condensed, so just semi-condensed, not semi-bold. That's cool. Once again, article title now has a little plus beside it, and if we right-click that, we can redefine the style, and then article 1 changes to match. In the case of the future templates I'm giving you, please don't do this, because it's a headache to figure out if you don't remember that you did it. But it's good to know for any layouts you're doing in the future, like your posters, for example. So next up, we need to fill in body text. And we can do this multiple ways. We can grab a Word document with the text on it that we're going to be using, which is what will happen with your articles that you're laying out. Or we can write our own stuff custom. I recommend writing outside of InDesign and then loading it in, because InDesign doesn't have a spell checker. And it's real easy to miss spelling errors on here. What we're going to do is we're going to use placeholder text in this case. So again, with the text button or text tool, we're going to click on this first column here. We now have a keystroke where we can type whatever we want. What we're going to do is right click and click fill with placeholder text. It's about a third of the way up. Beauty. It's suddenly full. Once again, we run into the problem of our bottom text does not match our top text. No problem. I'm going to highlight it all. And then I'm going to go to my paragraph styles, because there are certain settings in here that are only within paragraph. Like I have an indentation, for example. Then I'm going to click on body text. And the thing to remember is that all of this works in the exact same way that character styles do, just with different settings. It just adjusts different things. What's cool though is if you're doing a paragraph style, it will inherit any character traits as well. So you'll note that our font changed as well as giving us an indent or whatever. So paragraph styles tend to be what I work in. You'll also notice that half our text disappeared. Because unlike other programs, our frames don't adjust. Our text fits in our frame stays the same no matter what. So we need to make adjustments. The first thing we can do to get rid of this empty bottom line is just make our frame a little bigger. You'll note that with that box selected, I have this little red button. This red button means there's extra text beyond what's on screen. And what's cool about the layout we have right now is we have a spare frame where we can just throw that text. So I'm going to click on that red plus, and you'll see I have now just a whole bunch of text hanging onto my cursor. And I'll click on that frame. And that frame auto-filled. It filled up with all the text that was overset, which is what that's called. It also has a little plus, and we'll be dealing with that in a second. There's still text. Our biggest issue right now is that our text lines are unaligned. So they are all equally spaced, they're just not quite in alignment. So we're going to make an adjustment here. We're going to, there we go. I just bumped that second box down to move the line down, right? And now it all lines up. So a lot of what you're going to be doing in InDesign is going to be finagling with little tiny things to get everything perfect. Such as line alignment. Now, let's quick deal with this overset text here. You'll also know you have overset text, aside from clicking on the box, because if you never press W again, you'd never know there's overset text. Until the author of the article you're laying out tells you you completely missed 2 paragraphs. Which sucks. It really does. You can also see at the bottom of your screen one error. If you double click this, you have a little window called Preflight come up, which tells you the errors. So in our case, we have a text error, it's overset text, and if we click on the text frame, it tells us which frame. So the easiest way for us to deal with this, because we don't need to save any of this text, it's all placeholder, we right click on the frame, and we go to Edit in Story Editor. We get one more little window, because there's never enough in this program. And this window shows us it shows us all our text. This is really useful for if you're writing an actual novel, right? Because you've got so much text that all just runs in a row. You don't want to have to go find the frame that's wrong. So this lets us view all our text, and it also shows us everything that's overset, which is everything under this one black line. So I'm just going to highlight all of it and erase it. I'll add a period there just for propriety's sake. There we go. So we've run into a slight issue in that our frames leave us a lot of space between our title and our body. So I'm just going to make, again, another little finagly adjustment. I'm going to take my second box and just bump it up so that the line jumps back up. And actually, that'll look okay. Then I'll drag that frame down. I'm just going to right click all. I'm just going to refill placeholder text. That way it fills up right to the maximum. No overset, everything's lined up, and now there's no weird space between our title and our text. Finally, we can move in our moron text, which I do have a character style built and all of that. But if all else fails, if it's something this simple, you can click on it, Control C, Control V, and then just use your arrow keys to move it around. There we go, and let's say this, I think this article was on page 8, was what we had it set to. So that's the adjustment we're going to make. It's just that easy. Text, it's really hard to teach every single thing you need to know about laying out text in this program, because a lot of what you're going to be doing is putting out little fires. It's a matter of, well, my text doesn't look how I want it to look. How do I make it look right? And it's hard to account for all of that. And that's why we're going to be doing layout live. Once we're doing our layouts, we're going to have a period of time where you can come to me with questions or little issues. so I can teach you how to put out those little fires, right? In the meantime, that's about it for laying out text. That's the basics. One quick note before I actually let you guys go is I completely forgot to show you how to save and how to export your projects. And considering hopefully you've been following along with my example, I wanted to make sure I showed you that before you're just left to delete it and be sad when I ask you to pull it up next time. So with that, let's talk about saving and exporting on this program, because that's an issue I remember you guys having with Premiere and Adobe Audition, is the idea of what do I save, what do I export, what formats do I use. So let's talk about that. First, let's change this. There we go. So I have my layout. I have it in pretty much the same state you guys should have it. Well, I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to go to Save As. And I'll call it whatever. In my case, I'm calling it Tutorial 1. You'll note that it's saving an INDD file. And what this is an InDesign design file, I believe. InDesign document. This is essentially if you want to come back and edit your file in InDesign and have all the frames adjustable and everything, you can mess with everything and all the detail you want to mess with it. Save an InDesign file. This is no different than if you're working in Photoshop, you should save a Photoshop document. If you're working in Premiere, you save a Premiere project. These aren't the things you're going to hand in to your final, well, to me or your client. These are for your working requirements. So, with your thing now named, I'm going to name it Tutorial 2 because I don't want to save over my first one. You just hit save. There you go. So if you want to come back and work on this for the next tutorial, which I highly recommend, save now. If you wanted to export this and give it to a client, it's not quite in that state, but I'm going to show you how to do this. Exporting is important. Also, he's saving this little chunk of tutorial as its own tutorial, just for anyone who needs to refer back to it. So we're going to go File. We're going to go Export. And then, much like saving something, we will name it, and we will make sure it is set, in our case, at least for our class, to Adobe PDF. Print. A print PDF, not an interactive PDF. Again, you go File, Export, give it a name, make sure that it is set to Adobe PDF Print. This is the type of file you need to hand to me. In fact, I want, for every one of your layouts and your projects, I want both files. I want your InDesign, I want your Adobe Print PDF. If you don't hand me both of those specific kinds of files, I am forced to give you a 0 if you can't bring them up when I need them. I thought I'd leave you with that just before I actually ended that tutorial, because I don't want you guys to delete this and then go to the next tutorial and realize this was important. So with that, I'll see you in the next tutorial.